Elena's hands trembled as she signed the final deed, the pen scratching like dry leaves across the paper. The realtor, a woman with a smile too bright for the dim office, slid the keys across the desk. "Middle of nowhere," she chirped. "Exactly what you asked for." Elena didn't answer. She pocketed the keys, shouldered her duffel, and walked out into the gray Seattle drizzle without looking back. She was 42, childless by choice, widowed by chance, and done. Done with the city's noise, done with the hospital corridors that smelled of bleach and regret, done with the hollow echo of her own footsteps in an apartment that had once held laughter. The cabin waited 300 miles east, past the last cell tower, where the Cascades surrendered to high desert, and the sky pressed down like a lid. She had bought it sight unseen, a single photograph her only guide. Weathered cedar, a tin roof gone moss green, a porch leaning slightly, as if bowing to the wind. Perfect, she thought. A place to disappear. The drive took 2 days because she stopped every hour to breathe, to remind herself this was voluntary, not surrender. She passed roadside diners where truckers stared too long, gas stations with flickering neon, and once a field of sunflowers that turned their faces away from her as if they knew. By the time the gravel road narrowed to 2 ruts and the pines closed overhead, her SUV was coughing dust, and her heart was a clenched fist. She killed the engine in front of the cabin at dusk. Silence rushed in, thick, absolute, almost violent. No planes, no sirens, no human voices. Just the wind worrying the eaves and the faint tick of cooling metal. Elena sat behind the wheel until the dark swallowed the windshield. Then she dragged her duffel inside, lit a kerosene lamp, and discovered the place was smaller than the photo suggested. 1 room, a loft, a wood stove black with age. Mouse droppings peppered the floorboards. A single window stared at the forest like an unblinking eye. She swept, coughed, cried a little, then crawled into the sleeping bag she'd brought and listened to her pulse until sleep dragged her under. Morning arrived, silver and sharp. Frost feathered the inside of the glass. Elena built a fire with hands that remembered her father's lessons, kindling cross-hatched, newspaper twisted tight, and watched flames devour the chill. She had planned to spend the day inventorying supplies, mapping the silence, beginning the slow art of forgetting. Instead, she found the letter. It was wedged beneath the warped floorboard by the stove, a corner of yellowed envelope catching the firelight. Elena pried the board up with the poker. Inside lay a bundle, the envelope sealed with wax the color of dried blood. A photograph. A brass key on a leather cord. The photograph showed a young man in army fatigues, arms slung around a dark-haired woman whose smile could power cities. On the back in fading ink, Marco and Lou's Fort Lewis, 1998. If you find this, the cabin is yours now. Use it well. The envelope was addressed to the next keeper. Elena's fingers went numb. She broke the seal. The letter was 3 pages, handwritten in a hurried scrawl. Marco wrote of buying the land in '97 with Luz's life insurance money after leukemia took her at 29. He'd built the cabin himself, board by board, to outrun grief. But grief, he said, is a patient traveler. It followed him into the woods, sat with him on the porch, whispered through the pines. He stayed 10 years, planting apple saplings that never fruited, carving Luz's name into the beams, learning the names of every bird. Then one winter the loneliness cracked him open. He packed a rucksack, left the letter, and walked north along the ridgeline, intending never to return. If someone reads this, he concluded, tell them the cabin isn't an ending. It's a doorway. Step through. Elena read it twice, then folded the pages with care and tucked them into her coat pocket beside her heart. She spent the day walking the property, 20 acres of ponderosa and sage, a dry creek bed, the apple trees Marco had mentioned, gnarled but stubborn. Snow began to fall, soft as forgiveness. That night she dreamed of Luz laughing in a sunlit kitchen, flour on her cheeks, and woke with the taste of cinnamon on her tongue. Weeks blurred. Elena learned the cabin's moods, how the stove popped when the fire caught, how moonlight slid across the floorboards like spilled milk. She chopped wood until her shoulders burned, read every book she'd hauled in the SUV, wrote letters to no one, and burned them in the stove. The silence was no longer a lid but a blanket, yet something itched beneath her skin. An unfinished sentence. She kept returning to Marco's words. A doorway. Doorways, she thought, imply arrival. One February afternoon, the sky hung low and metallic. Elena was splitting kindling when she heard the engine, a distant, wounded growl that didn't belong. She set the axe aside and walked to the porch. A pickup limped up the rutted track, steam hissing from beneath the hood. It rolled to a stop beside her SUV, and the driver's door creaked open. A man unfolded himself, tall, bearded, maybe 35, coat patched at the elbows. Snowflakes melted on his lashes. He raised both hands, palms out. "I'm not here to rob you," he called, voice rough with disuse. Radiators shot. Saw chimney smoke. Thought maybe water? Elena studied him. His eyes were the color of storm glass, and exhaustion carved parentheses around his mouth. Something in his stance, shoulders curved inward as if expecting a blow, tugged at her. She nodded toward the porch. "There's a bucket by the steps. Springs 50 yards north. I'll put coffee on." His name was Daniel. He filled the bucket, topped off the radiator, then stood uncertainly by his truck until Elena gestured him inside. The cabin smelled of pine smoke and coffee. He removed his hat, knitted, frayed, and held it like a shield. She poured 2 mugs. They drank in silence until the stove crackled like an impatient host. "Passing through?" she asked. "Trying to." He stared into his coffee. "Lost my map 2 days back. GPS died with the charger. Been circling these ridges like a ghost." "Where you headed?" He hesitated. "North. Canada, maybe. Anywhere the past can't find me." The words landed between them, familiar as her own heartbeat. Elena set her mug down. "Stay the night." "Storm's coming." "You'll freeze out there." Daniel looked ready to refuse, pride flaring. But the wind chose that moment to rattle the windows. He nodded. He slept on the couch under a quilt Elena's grandmother had sewn. She lay awake in the loft, listening to his breathing even out, and felt the cabin shift, like a ship adjusting to new weight. In the morning, the world was white and hushed. Daniel's truck sat under a blanket of snow. The radiator had frozen solid. He stared at it, hands in pockets. "Could take days to thaw," Elena said. "Or weeks if the cold holds." He laughed, a sound like breaking ice. "Guess I'm your problem now." She should have minded. Instead, she handed him an axe. They fell into rhythm. Daniel split wood with economical swings. Elena stacked it. He fixed the leaning porch post with scavenged nails and profanity. She taught him to bake cornbread in the cast-iron skillet. Evenings they played cribbage by lamplight, the pegs clicking like rain on tin. Daniel spoke little of before. Elena gathered fragments. A daughter he hadn't seen in 2 years. A divorce finalized in a courthouse parking lot. A construction job in Spokane that ended when the bottle took over. He said the word alcoholic like spitting out a fishbone. One night, after a dinner of venison stew, Daniel had snared a deer with a bow he'd carved from yew. He asked about the letter. Elena fetched it from her coat. He read slowly, lips moving. When he finished, he laid the pages on the table as if they might burn him. "Marco," he whispered. "I knew a Marco, same unit, 03 deployment. Lost track after Baghdad." His eyes filled. He used to say the desert taught him how big silence could be. Guess he found a bigger one. Snow kept falling. March arrived disguised as January. The apple trees stood skeletal against the sky. One afternoon, Daniel found Elena in the loft, staring at a photograph she'd propped on the windowsill. Her and David on their wedding day, both of them laughing at something off camera. Daniel didn't ask who he was. He simply sat beside her and waited. "Cancer," she said finally. "Pancreas. 6 months from diagnosis to grave. I kept working. Nurse, 12-hour shifts, because if I stopped, the world would notice he was gone." Her voice cracked. "I thought if I came here, I could outrun the missing." Daniel reached out, then stopped himself. "You can't outrun missing. You carry it. Difference is sometimes the load gets shared." That night, the northern lights unfurled, great curtains of green and violet rippling overhead. They stood on the porch in borrowed coats, breath pluming. Elena felt the sky press down and lift her at the same time. Daniel's shoulder brushed hers. Neither moved away. Spring crept in sideways. Snowmelt turned the creek into a braid of silver. The apple trees budded tentative pink. Daniel's truck started on the 3rd try, but he didn't leave. Instead, he built a bench beneath the largest apple tree, sanding the pine until it glowed. Elena planted lettuce in a cold frame, her knees in the mud, humming songs she hadn't known she remembered. One May evening, a knock startled them. A teenage girl stood on the porch, backpack sagging, eyes red-rimmed. She looked at Daniel and burst into tears. "Dad?" Daniel froze. The girl, Lily, launched herself into his arms. Over her shoulder, Elena saw a social worker hovering by a dusty sedan, custody papers, emergency placement, a grandmother too ill to keep her. Lily had run away from the group home, hitched rides, followed rumors of a father in the mountains. Daniel held her like she might dissolve. That night, the cabin shrank to accommodate 3 heartbeats. Lily took the loft. Elena and Daniel shared the couch, a careful foot of space between them. In the dark, he whispered, "I don't know how to do this." "None of us do," Elena answered. "We learn as we go." Summer arrived in a rush of heat and bees. Lily helped Daniel repair the tin roof, her laughter echoing off the ridges. Elena taught her to identify constellations, tracing Orion's belt with a stick in the dirt. They harvested the first apples, small, tart, miraculous. One afternoon, Lily found the letter beneath the floorboard. She read it aloud while Daniel whittled a flute from elderberry wood. When she reached Marco's line about doorways, she looked up. "So we're the next keepers?" "Looks like," Elena said. Lily considered this, then ran outside and carved L+E+D into the porch post beside M+L. The letters were crooked, earnest. Elena's eyes stung. August brought a letter of its own, forwarded from Elena's old address, postmarked Yellowstone. Side a single sheet in the same hurried scrawl. "To the next keepers. Found your smoke signal on the ridge. Apples look good. Tell Lily the flute needs a C-sharp. Tell Elena the silence isn't empty. It's listening." Marco, tucked in the envelope, was a photograph. An older Marco, beard gone white, standing beneath the same apple tree, holding a basket of fruit. On the back, 2025. The doorway swings both ways. That night they built a bonfire in the clearing. Sparks rose like reverse stars. Lily played the flute, off-key, determined. Daniel wrapped an arm around Elena's shoulders, tentative. She leaned into him. The firelight painted their faces gold. Elena thought of David, of Luz, of Marco walking north with grief on his back. She thought of the cabin, how it had waded through blizzards and solitude, patient as stone. She looked at Daniel, at Lily dancing with the flute, and felt the missing shift. Not gone, but shared, like Marco said. The load distributed across 3 sets of shoulders, across years, across strangers turned family. When the fire burned low, Daniel cleared his throat. "I've been thinking about staying, if there's room." Elena smiled, the first unguarded one in years. "There's always room. Doorways, remember?" Lily whooped and tackled them both into the grass. Above, the Milky Way spilled across the sky like spilled sugar. Somewhere an owl asked its eternal question. Elena answered with her heartbeat. Yes, yes, yes. Years later, travelers would find the cabin, hikers, runaways, a veteran with nightmares, a couple whose marriage teetered on silence. They'd find the porch post crowded with initials, the apple trees heavy with fruit, the letter updated in multiple hands. They'd find coffee on the stove and 3 voices raised in off-key harmony. And they'd learn what Elena had learned the night the sky opened. The world doesn't end in the middle of nowhere. Sometimes it begins again. The doorway swings both ways. Step through,